Whoa, 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 hold on a second. We are not doing an intro until Mr. Character Workshop himself explains where he's been all this time. So anyways, cut the camera to him.
Oh my gosh. Ah! Jeez! Were you guys watching me sleep this whole time? Anyway, hello everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, and yeah, the reason why I've been away for a month is because I took a really long nap, so my apologies. Okay, in all seriousness, so stuff happening outside of YouTube, as per usual, has kind of prevented me from being able to make videos all the time, and what makes matters even more interesting is I now have two jobs right now instead of one, so definitely a bit less time to make videos now. But rest assured, I will do my best to make sure I keep you guys posted with more content. And thankfully, since I'm got the house to myself this weekend, I have some more time to film videos. So in addition to this video, I got some other ones in the pipes, like the first new episode of Plants vs. Zombies Punctified Season 10, I still got that to do, and many others from that point forward. I'll do my best to keep videos up, but yeah, my apologies that it's been taking a while for videos to come out, and also the month hiatus that I've been taking, so my apologies for that. Anyways, tilt the camera a bit because you can't see my full head. So, what are we going to be talking about in this episode of A Cave from England? We are at the halfway point of Season 9. So, we are going to take, once again, another trip into the world of Doctor Who. And we're actually going to be skipping a few stories this time because, well, after Galaxy 4, there's a couple missing stories here and there. Either completely missing or mostly missing. And I'll just briefly go over details about those episodes. So, first up is Mission to the Unknown, which is essentially a one-part story that kind of serves as like a prequel to another story that I'll be discussing briefly later on. Afterwards is The Mythmakers, which is a four-part story about the Doctor and his companions during the Trojan War. And Vicky decides to leave the Doctor and Steven, and in her place comes in Katarina. And then the next story after that will be Dalek's Master Plan, which is a 12-part story, the longest story in Doctor Who history at the time. And yes, it's another story involving the Daleks and Katarina, who, even though she was the newest companion of the Doctor at the time, spoiler alert, she ends up dying during the events of it. And in addition to that, we get another companion character by the name of Sarah Kingdom, who, spoiler alert, also got killed during the events of that story, so yeah, after Dalek's Master Plan, it was just the Doctor and Steven. And then the next story would be the Massacre at St. Bartholomew's Eve, or as a lot of people simply just call it, the Massacre. This is where we get introduced to a new companion. So many new companion introductions within these past few stories. This time being... oh, sorry, I knocked over the camera for a bit. This time being Dodo Chaplet, played by Jackie Lane. And after the events of this story, she joins the Doctor and Steven. And one more thing I gotta point out about the Massacre that I think is really interesting is there is another character in that story that William Hartnell also plays, in addition to being the first Doctor. And that character was apparently Abbot of Amboise. I might have mispronounced that, so my apologies. And then we get into the topic of today's episode, The Ark. Story number 23 overall, and the 6th story of Season 3. The events of the story start out in the Doctor, Steven, and Dodo landing in a jungle-like area, which Dodo initially assumed was a part of England, and after seeing that all the animals in that forest are from like other countries around the world, she, Steven, and the Doctor try to figure out like, how could there be a jungle that has all these types of animals in there. Soon, the Doctor and his companions then realize that apparently the TARDIS landed inside a spacecraft, and the so-called jungle that they were in was essentially a miniature zoo. And they also find out that the time period that they're in is at least 10 million years into the future at that time. And they find out that Earth is apparently about to be destroyed by the expansion of the sun, which, in other words, the Red Giants, essentially. And the spacecraft itself was fleeing from Earth, and in the spacecraft are the last remains of humanity. And they also stored a lot of their members, millions of them to be exact, in a miniaturized form. And in addition to the zoo, they've also harvested a lot of the plant life on the planet as well. And apparently the ship voyage is planned to be 700 years long. So the ship itself begins a 700-year voyage onto another Earth-like planet called Refucius 2. And Dodo compares the ship that they're on to Noah's Ark, which, very similar to Noah's Ark, it takes life from Earth and transport it somewhere else to be safe. And the ship itself is being commanded by human guardians who, their servants are these one-eyed non-human alien creatures called monoids, who essentially have this like, they have a really interesting design. They have like really big puffy hair and one eye and not much else. And also their full bodies almost look very fish-like, at least their legs do. And one small detail to mention about the ship in this story is there's also a giant statue that was being worked on the ship as the voyage was going. During the events of the story, Dodo starts to showcase a symptom of the common cold where she kept sneezing. And the disease itself ends up spreading throughout the ship as it became apparent that the common cold is pretty deadly to the humans and the monoids during this time, as they have no natural immunity to this disease. And the Ark's commander ends up being one of the first to get the common cold. The deputy commander, Zentos, then takes over control and accuses the TARDIS crew for breeding the virus onto the ship and puts them through trial, essentially. However, the original commander, who was still sick from the common cold, disagrees with Deputy Commander Zentos over his decision to basically kill the Doctor and his companions, and asks for them to make a cure for the common cold, which the Doctor ends up making a vaccine for, and it ends up healing everybody that was affected on the ship. And afterwards, the Doctor and his companions were forgiven, and basically the Doctor and his crew were allowed to go back to the TARDIS and travel wherever else they were going to go. So then we see the TARDIS land again, but it somehow ends up landing in the Ark again. And they soon realize that they have made it into the future, as the statue that was being worked on earlier in the story is now complete, but instead of having a human face on it, it ended up having the face of a monoid on it. And they have discovered that over the course of the 700 years that the ship was going, the monoids have actually taken over the Guardians, and now they're the ones in control. And in addition to that, they now have electronic voice communicators, so they're able to speak. So the leader of the monoids then assembles a landing party to Refucius 2, where the Doctor and Dodo were brought over alongside one of the human slaves. And they discover a large building that was past several pieces of vegetation, occupied by the Refucians, who were apparently giant beings that were invisible by solar flares, so you can't see them, but you can hear them. And then the monoids then plan to colonize Refucius 2 exclusively for themselves and not for the humans as well. And they plan to abandon the human slaves on the Ark with a large bomb that they actually planted in the statue itself. And then there's like a small little subplot about some of the other monoids not being for the leader of the monoids, and they kind of have their own little revolution, and it ends up at some point in the story them fighting off against one another. While the Doctor and Dodo were on the planet of Refucius 2, Steven was back on the Ark helping out the human slaves to basically get back control of the Ark and to get rid of the bomb that they ended up finding out was being planted in the statue itself. In the meantime, one of the Refucians actually made it aboard the Ark and was able to use its strength to remove the statue from the ship and throw it out into space where it would explode, and nobody got harmed at the end of the story. Well, besides some of the monoids that killing each other over the Civil War they had, and you know what I mean. So after this whole thing, the Refucians agreed to let the human colonists onto the planet as long as the humans and the monoids actually agreed to live in peace with one another so that no race was a slave of another. So that ended up working very well in the end. And then we end the story off with the Doctor and his companions in the TARDIS, and the Doctor somehow ends up being invisible and declares that they're somehow under attack, which we'll see how that plays out next time. So yep, that was Doctor Who The Ark, and I gotta say, pretty decent story. Not really a whole lot to say. This is definitely a rather interesting story, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there was any Doctor Who stories before that really played with the time elements of Doctor Who as much as this one did at this point. Like, there were no other stories to my knowledge where the Doctor and his companions were in one period of time somewhere, and then later on in the story they will be in another period of time in that same area. Like, I don't think that's ever happened before, and I think it's really interesting. And it also shows a lot of consequences of, stepping into not your own time period, as Dodo's cold ended up being very deadly towards the humans and the monoids on that Ark. And yeah. In addition to that, apparently the vaccine that the Doctor worked on in the story to help cure the humans in the earlier portion of the Ark ended up not working after a while. It ended up killing a lot of the colonists, and it made it easier for the monoids to revolt and become the leaders themselves. So that's definitely, in my opinion, one of the more interesting parts of this story is the playing around with how time affects stuff. Like, essentially the butterfly effect, but in the future, essentially. And as I brought up before, the monoids are a rather bizarre but rather interesting design, and yeah, I feel like the hairstyle of these creatures themselves kind of speak volumes to the time period, because yeah, that's a very common hairstyle you would see, like, in the 60s. And I guess some people also have that hairstyle nowadays, because another modern example, Ian from Smosh had that hairstyle at one point, so makes you wonder if Ian's part monoid. That was a crappy joke. But yeah, all in all, in terms of the cast themselves too pretty well. The Doctor's great as always. Steven, pretty solid. Dodo, this is the first story I've ever seen with Dodo, and unfortunately the fact that her first story doesn't exist, I can't really, have much else to say about her, but I mean, besides her cold being the main effect of the story, she doesn't really do that much else besides that. Not saying she's bad at character or anything, but she's just kind of there for a portion of the story, especially the second half with the monoids taking over the humans. Can't really say much about her. Other than that, the rest of the guest cast do really well. I especially love the voice actor for the Refucians, that being Richard Bale. And yeah, that's I just gotta say, out of all the guest actors, he's probably the one to bring up the most, since his voice, I like his voice. I don't have much else to say, but yeah, all in all, the Ark, interesting story. Not an amazing one per se, nothing to really write home about, but the fact that it has a really good storytelling of like how time can really be affected, regardless of whether you time travel to the past or time travel to the future, it can have serious consequences. So, the Ark's interesting, and as an average story, I will give it kind of an average score, that being a 7 out of 10. Alright, and that is about it for my review of the Ark from Doctor Who. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and hope you guys look forward to more videos in the future. Not specifically for this show, but for all my shows, essentially. So, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and turn on the notification bell so you get notified each time I upload a new video. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you think. That's about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. And on the next episode of A Came from England, whenever that's going to be, I'm going to be covering a recent, rediscovered piece of Thomas Lost Media. And I'm so excited to watch it and talk about it. Also, one more thing. I just realized that around the time I'm recording this, A Came from England's 6-year anniversary is coming up. So, yeah, happy early 6-year anniversary to A Came from England for anybody who wanted to know about that.